This morning, we welcome back to On Point Talk with Carlette Christmas, Gail Lukasik. We first met Gail when her book entitled White Like Her, a story of race and racial passing. It captured national and international attention. This morning, Gail joins us with her new book entitled What They Never Told Us, True Stories of Family Secrets and Hidden Identities Revealed. Gail, good morning and welcome back.
Good morning, and thank you for having me back. I'm very excited to talk to you about the new book.
Me too. But before we talk about, Gail, the new book, I want to remind people who maybe were not familiar with White Like Her, uh, how that all unfolded. Just give us like a brief synopsis of that particular story.
Okay, I'll try and make it brief. It's not always easy. Um, I made the discovery of the fact that my mother was passing, the initial discovery in 1995, which, as you know, there was no ancestry.com. There was very little internet. And I found census records, 1900 census records from Louisiana. And I was looking for my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, Azimah Frederick. I found him and his family. He was, I think, 2 or 3 years old. And I noticed something unusual, or caught my eye, I should say. There were bees after all their names, all the Fredericks. And I traced that column up and it said race. And so I thought, wait a minute, what's happening here? So I went and asked the woman who was helping us, and I said, does B mean black? And she said, oh, yes. And then suddenly she let loose with all these racial slurs using the N word in relationship to a candy. So, anyway, I got out of there pretty quickly.
What was the candy?
Well,
It was it
and
licorice?
I don't know because I never heard of the candy. And I
Okay.
didn't want to ask her because I just wanted to leave.
Uh-huh.
Because she sort of ended her whole tirade, which she thought she was joking, like she was making a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was in on it and I had no idea. So she ended by saying something like, "Oh, I know who you are. You're the one with all the slaves in your family." It's like, what? So I got in my car. It was January. I lived in the Chicago area. It was cold. I couldn't even start the car. I I sat there and I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and I said, "What just happened and who are you?"
Mm.
I went into that building a white woman. I exited that building not sure what my identity was. So let's fast forward a little bit.
Sure.
Um, I wanted to talk to my mother. I grew up in Ohio. She lived in Ohio. But my father became very ill, so I had to wait. This was not a discussion you have on the phone. I wanted to see her in person. So I waited. My dad died 2 years later, and I invited my mother to come visit me. And that's when I asked her about. I told her what I found because in the interim, I had sent to Louisiana for her birth certificate because I thought, well, census records aren't always accurate, so I
Mm-hmm.
need more information. Got the birth certificate. My mom was born in 1921, and for race, there were three letters, COL, which I assume meant colored
Right.
in 1921. Again, sent another letter to the state, said, please explain COL, and they confirmed what I thought. So when I brought that up to my mom, her first reaction was, I don't know what birth certificate you have, but mine says I'm white. And she got very angry. And then I said, well, you know what, Mom, I've got some other information I can show you. And that's when she got very quiet. And she said, you can never tell anyone this until after I die, because how will I hold my head up with my friends? Really shocking to me. My mother raised us to be open to all peoples, religions, whatever, it didn't matter. Yet she was telling me this. So I kept her secret for 17 years, never told anyone. Though in that interim, of course, we have ancestry, and I did a little bit of my own research, found an ancestor who served in the Native Guard in Louisiana, Civil War guy for the Union. Very proud of this guy. So anyway, she died in 2014, and Genealogy Roadshow was not Gene. I'm sorry, not Gene. And says yes, Genealogy Roadshow was looking for stories based in New Orleans. I applied, I was on, and they confirmed everything I thought was true. My mother had been passing for white, and they even brought up the first document was the 1940 census records in
Wow.
Louisiana. And on those records, she and her sister were listed as Negro. Yet she marries my white dad in Ohio.
Hmm.
The next census records, which just came out recently, she's listed as white.
You know, every time I hear the story and read the story, and it's connected to the Fredericks here in Alexandria. Stephanie Frederick and her father were
Yes.
an integral part of your mother's and your family's story. And as you move forward into the book that we're talking about this morning, you know, as I started reading it, I thought the Today Show appearance was amazing for the book. But tell me how that appearance really changed everything about you and your story, if it did at all.
It did, and I'm glad you asked that question because up until that point, I've been giving talks and appearances, and I could count on one question. So now that you know, so how do you identify racially? The way I had been identifying was I was a white woman with Black ancestry. And actually, early on, I did an appearance in St. Louis at a bookstore, and a woman who identified herself as Black asked that question. I gave that answer, and she said, I'm glad you gave that answer because there's no other answer you can give. And I'm the president of the Black Caucus in St. Louis. So I thought, okay, so I'm giving the right answer, I guess, because I was trying to be sensitive. I hadn't experienced racism. You can see what I look like. No one ever asked me my race.
Right.
But after the appearance on Megyn Kelly, I gave that same answer. And about 10 days later, a woman who, again, she identifies herself as Black, and she said she hasn't read the book, but she's telling Black people not to read my book. And she said the reason they should not read my book is because I did not honor my Black ancestry properly. And I was kind of taken aback by that. I thought I was. And I thought, well, my first thought was, well, if you had read the book, you would have seen that I did. But, I took it to heart and I started thinking more and more about it. And this became a journey for me. This was not an overnight, okay, I'm going to change my mind about how I'm going to identify. It took me several years to really think about what my racial identity is and what I'm comfortable with. And I realized after having those two very different reactions that it didn't matter how I identified, someone was going to be unhappy with me. And that really the person I should be comfortable with is me. I should be the one making that decision,
Sure.
not being so scrutinized. So I went through a whole process. And what I think I wouldn't necessarily call it an epiphany, but I ended up being on a show called My American Melting Pot. It was a podcast. And I was on with another woman who also looked white and had Black ancestry. And the host, Professor Tarps, said to me as we went through the story, she says, in some way, whether you know it or not, you're an ambassador of Blackness for white people.
Mm.
And I thought, well, that's not really my intention. I'm just a storyteller. I don't have, but the more I thought about the talks I've given, and yeah, a lot of times it's an all white audience and they're perplexed. They're trying to understand what I'm telling them and my mother's story. And so I thought, well, how do I want to go forward? How do I want to think about myself? I can just look at my DNA, which
Mm-hmm.
is what, 7 to 9% African. I could also look at my ancestors and going all the way back to Marta, who in the 1700s was an enslaved woman. She had 13 children by her enslaver, who did emancipate her after the fourth child. but what choices did she have? I mean, let's think about it. And I thought, and then I go forward from her through everything my Frederick side of the family had suffered because of racism, racial designations, and all the way up to my mom, who grew up in Jim Crow South,
Mm,
limited opportunities, right? So I thought, you know what? From now on, I'm going to claim both sides of myself,
wow.
meaning I'm going to say I'm mixed race. And when the 2020 census came out, that's the box I checked. And I say this in my latest book. If I have a medical form to fill out and there's not a box for me, I make one. I make one and I check it and then I say what I am. And if anyone, no one's ever asked me to explain it, but if they want to, I'll be happy to.
Wow. It's an incredible story. Our guest this morning is Gail Lukasik. The book is entitled What They Never Told Us: True Stories of Family Secrets and Hidden Identities Revealed. We're going to take a break, but we're back after this. This morning, we're really talking about an incredible woman who I believe it just took great courage, Gail, for you to share your mother's story, to share your family's story, and then to, as the person called you in the book, to really become an ambassador for race. We're living in a country right now that is so sharply divided on race that it's still got to be a challenge. And I asked you during the break, how old were you when your life literally changed as you knew it?
Yes, I was 49. The thing about that, though, you remember my mother swore me to secrecy and she lived to 92. So I was
She
keeping that.
lived to 92?
Yes. Yeah. So I kept that. I mean, I told my husband, I told my children, I told a good friend the truth. But I carried that secret for 17 years. And, when you're carrying a secret like that, it isn't always prominent in your mind because you're getting on with your life. It once in a while it would become more, in the front of my mind. But for the most part, it wasn't. It wasn't until I was on Genealogy Roadshow that this really changed everything in my life, because I went so public.
So I wondered, like, as I was reading the story, and you're getting ready for, at the time, Megyn Kelly was on the Today Show, and you think you have the right answer about how to identify your race, but I started to wonder, on that long journey, did you ever do any work with a therapist? Because not only are you dealing with your own trauma, but you're dealing with the trauma and the shame that your mother carried as well.
I didn't, but part of my story, as you know, after being on Genealogy Roadshow, about 2 days later, Stephanie Frederick contacted me, and I didn't know who Stephanie Frederick was.
Right.
And in quotes, I'm going to put my lost family. When my mother decided to pass and go north, I don't think my mother was aware of, I know she knew her father remarried, but she wasn't aware of all the rest of it, the children and her nieces and nephews. So they didn't know I existed. I didn't know they existed. Part of my healing was reuniting with them. Her dad, Azima Frederick Jr., my half uncle. Then I find out I have 2 aunts and a whole slew of cousins that I didn't know about. And they were so welcoming and so generous. And in Stephanie's email to me, the first one, she said, I just want to welcome you to our family.
Mm,
Now, the stories in the book that we're talking about, what they never told us, that doesn't always happen.
right.
You find your lost family. That does not, some of the stories, people are rejected. I wasn't rejected. I was welcomed. And they had a welcome home party for me in New Orleans in April of 2015, where I got to meet everyone who could, and the Fredericks are spread across the US. They're
Mm-hmm.
all over. So people flew in and I got to really meet them. And I was still grieving my mom. And I remember sitting at the table where we were having our meal, just staring at Uncle Fred and Aunt Brenda and Aunt Alma and seeing my mother,
Wow.
who I was grieving. It was, I apologize to myself. I'm sorry I'm staring, but I'm seeing my mom. And we call that in the book genetic mirroring. When people in the book find their biological parents or siblings, they stare at them because up until that point, no one looked like them because their genetic identity has been hidden. So when you find your biological people, it's really emotional.
So I always wondered in the conversations that we've had in the past, Gail, and people, this is something that people want to talk about all the time, is your racial identity and how that changes after you realize that your mother is black, was black.
Yeah, designated Negro, yes.
So, but but you live your life as a white woman your whole life. And just
Yes.
because you find that out, when people see you, they don't see a woman who is biracial. We see a woman who is white, who is
Right.
clearly non-challenged white. How does the inside change, if at all?
It does change. For one thing, and I'll back up a little bit, when I was writing White Like Her, the journey of that book is to go back as far as I can in the history of the Frederick family. I knew that we probably had enslaved people. So I wanted to know about that. I wanted to find my people. And when you find that, it's almost, I want to say, like a physical thing, because then it's not like I didn't know about enslavement or the history of it. And it's not that I didn't understand it was wrong and that, this was not what this country should have been doing. I totally did. But when I think of it as those are my ancestors,
Hmm.
I have a whole different feeling.
Now,
It's no longer out of a history book.
right. And that's what I was going to say. So what people may or may not know about you is that you've been really a writer. You've been a writer your whole life. And
Yes.
so in White Like Her, when I'm reading that book, it almost is like you're researching and you're writing this story, but it feels like you're in the story, but you're
Right.
really outside of the story too, if that makes sense.
No, that's totally correct. And when I decided I was going to do the memoir as opposed to fiction, I told myself several things. One of which was you're going to have to be honest. You're going to have to talk about things you might be uncomfortable talking about because people see right through you if you're not honest.
Right.
And the other thing is I thought, well, I have all this experience as a mystery author. So what's a good way to engage my reader is to tell it like a mystery so that they go on the journey of going back in time with me. And so I have to, as you said, both stand outside and inside the story. And interestingly, the same thing happened with the new book. And I did not expect that to happen because my approach with the book, What They Never Told Us, was to tell other people's stories
Right.
of finding out they're not who they thought they were. Usually it's one or both parents aren't their biological parents. And in some cases, they find out they're not the same race they thought they were or ethnicity. So I thought, okay, I can do that. I'll listen to their stories. I'm the journalist. Well, the same thing happened as when I was writing the
Mm.
memoir. And I think it was because of the way I wrote the book, the process involved that engaged my emotions so much. And I ended up feeling sometimes like I was standing in their shoes.
Mm.
And I'll tell you what I did. All the interviews were done on Zoom, so they're recorded. And what I would do, I'd do the interview and I'd wait a day and try and transcribe either the day after or 2 days after where it's fresh. But when I say transcribe, I don't mean I'm typing, I am doing that. But I'm looking at these people for their facial expressions, their gestures. When does their tone of voice change? Is that a trigger for something? So that I'm noting all that. And when you're doing something like that, you are entering their story. And so many of them said to me, I feel comfortable telling you this story because you know what I'm talking about. So I think in many cases, I wasn't so much a stranger to them because they understood that I understood. And it became very emotional. There was one story I was transcribing, Brad Ewell, and it became, he did find his biological parents, but his mother was already deceased. He found out he was adopted. He had no clue. And he talked at length about the loss that was, the loss opportunity. And while I'm transcribing this and listening to him, I'm losing my brother. My brother died during the writing of the book. It was my
Oh,
young, I only have one sibling.
Gail, I'm
He's 5 years.
sorry. I did not know
It
that.
was so awful. And I made a note in where I was transcribing. I said, I've got to take a break here. This is hitting too close to home. I have to step away and I'll come back.
Mm,
So I hope that comes through in the writing that I'm not just saying, okay, here's the structure of it. They find out from DNA or maybe a family member, they're not who then they go and search and then there's this. No, no, no. It's much more traumatic and involved. And I think that's in the main media, that's what sometimes is missing when we see these DNA stories. It's like, oh, he
right,
found out he had another dad,
right.
and the dad who raised him, they're all so happy. And look, they're together. Well, we've missed a huge chunk. I actually have a story in there, Terry's story, where he is the father who raised him. He finds out that's not his biological father, and the two dads are getting along great. But in between, there's a lot that happens to get to that point, and he's still struggling with his identity.
And I think that was the bigger piece for every person that will hopefully read this book, because when you find out that you're not who you thought you were in all the years that you lived, for you almost half your life,
Yeah,
what goes into how you move forward?
right.
How do you forgive? And we talked about this in some of our last conversations. How do you forgive your mother for lying to you, not only lying to you your whole life, but then when you find out the truth, she asks you to lie some more?
Yes, I'm complicit in her passing. I know that. Um, I hold no anger toward my mother. I never did. I forgave her almost immediately. Um,
Why was
what
it
I do,
so easy, you think, Gail, to forgive her?
because I understand. I understand the history. I understand my mother's upbringing, how chaotic, how difficult. She wasn't really raised by either parent. She was kind of passed around from cousin to cousin. And I knew that she was looking to get out of that and to have more opportunity for herself and for her children. So I get that. What I carry with me to this day is sadness.
Mm.
And the sadness, and this is true in the stories in the book, um, is that after she knew I was going to keep the secret, I would occasionally bring up to her something I found out. I told you about my Civil War ancestor.
Mhm.
She would do this. And so, how are the kids? I didn't want to talk about it. And
Wow.
we could have had a very intimate relationship. This could have been our thing.
How did that make you
And
feel when she would do that, Gail?
a little bit angry and a little bit frustrated. And then I know my mother very well. So it's like I knew where she was coming from. I didn't like it. Now, the people in the book aren't always as forgiving. Some of them told me they felt very betrayed by their parents. And in many cases, when they went to let's say in the case of an adoption, to the adoptive parent or parents, they were told it really doesn't matter.
Mhm.
We're still the same person. And that for them was triggering. It does matter. They're not the same person. And where healing comes from, which what they told me, is finding the biological parent or their biological identity, and then going from there and trying to put all those pieces back together, because it's very disorienting.
Mhm.
You know that. I mean, it's very disorienting to find this out.
But not only does it affect the person who thinks their racial identity is one thing, it affects the whole family. It
It
affects
does.
your whole life. So, how do you, like, with this story of what they never told us, it feels like people, like an outpouring of people who are saying, okay, I don't want to keep this secret anymore, these family secrets. So, is there like a coming together of people in oneness that understand that they have been lied to or deceived or whatever you want to put it their whole lives? Is there some comfort in that, in people sharing
There is.
likenesses?
You know, when I made my discovery was a very long time ago, so I didn't have the resources that are available now. And when people ask me, well, where should I go? What should I do? I'm really messed up emotionally. I tell them one of the best places to start is there's a resource called Right to Know. You can go just type that in, Google it, Right to Know. And really what it means is right to know your genetic identity. And there you can find a lot of resources, different groups. There's a group called DNA Angels, which will help you on your genetic search. They're dedicated to that. The founder of Right to Know, Cara Rubenstein Dayerin, is herself someone who made a DNA discovery that totally shook up her entire life. And I can tell you a little bit about her story. Um, Very interesting. She was told and raised as a biracial person.
Mm-hmm.
She had a white mom, she still does, black father. And she was fierce in defending her biracial identity. I mean, she suffered. In school, she was called all kinds of names, terrible names. And she related a story to me. She says, one day I was in school sitting next to my classmate, and she said, "Are you biracial?" And Cara said, "I am." And then she slapped her in the face.
Wow.
And her black grandfather even said to her, "You know, Cara, if it ever comes to time in this country where it gets bad again, you can pass. So you should do it." And she said, "I would never do that." She was fierce.
Mm.
So she decides to do a DNA test because she's thinking her and her black father will go back to Africa and find out where they're from. So she takes her test first. Oh yeah, she's half something else besides white, but it's not African.
Yeah.
It's Ashkenazi Jew. What the heck? I mean, she said, I could not believe it. So part of her healing was to seek out her biological father. And yes, she finds him. He is deceased, but he's a very famous person in Seattle. He's known as the Salmon King of Seattle,
Wow.
Sam Rubenstein. And yeah, very successful, rich philanthropist. I can't even say the word. Gave a lot of money to
Mm-hmm.
people. Um, and she found it out, and she had a geneticist do the search for her so that it was verified. She went to the family and they rejected her.
Wow.
They thought she was after their money. She was not. She said, all I really wanted was the medical history, which she did get, but she did get the right to change her maiden name to Rubenstein. So that's her middle name now. And she has the right to her story, which she can tell. They can't stop her. But for half her life, she's in her 40s. She thought she was a biracial woman, and she's not.
Right. She's a white woman.
Well, yes, half Jewish. Yeah. Well, you know what her black father said to her? Well, how did he put it? You went from one, put upon group of people to another. you know. Um, and she's really embraced her Jewish identity. She before all this happened in, Israel, she went there.
Gail, did you ever think that White Like Her would evolve and change lives and unearth stories the way that it continues?
No. The easy answer is no. What happened, and I honestly was shocked, after the book came out, and then I was on the Mick and Kelly Today show, and I'm not exaggerating. I received what I would call an avalanche of mail through my website from strangers from around the world, not just in the US. I'm talking Australia, South Africa, Europe, everywhere. And they had to tell me their family secret. Most of them, that's why they wrote. I heard you on the show, or I read your book, and let me tell you my family secret. I'm a stranger. So I answered every one. I always do, unless someone's being really nasty to me, which doesn't usually happen. But I answered everybody. And it kept happening. It just wasn't just one time. And even today, on occasion, I will get one of these emails. Obviously, no longer an avalanche, but still hearing from people who have a family secret. And once everything sort of died down with White Like Her, and I moved on a little bit, I started thinking, there are a lot of people out there who have these secrets, who have a need to have these secrets voiced, to have us hear them. So that's why I decided to write the follow-up book, What They Never Told Us.
It's an incredible book, and I'll say it, I've said it since the moment we met. It's taken an incredible amount of courage for you to share your mother's story, your family's story, and now to write and help others share their truths. What do you hope that people who, in families that have lived their whole lives, that are keeping family secrets, what do you hope that this book will mean for maybe those people?
I thought about that. I really did. As you know from the book, I do not throw the parents under the bus.
No.
I give a lot of historical background on what was happening when these parents decided to keep the adoption secret or the donor conception secret or whatever. You have to understand, we can't look at it with 21st century eyes. We have to look at it mid-century, the last century. So what I would hope they would come away with, and I don't give advice. I'm not in the advice giving field. So what I would hope is that they would think about why they're keeping the secret. And also think about how easy it would be for their adult child to take a DNA test and discover something that they don't want known. Wouldn't it be better to come to terms with it for yourself and then share it with your adult child so you can tell your side of the story? I can't tell you how much I wish my mother had done that. I wish she had told me when I became an adult the truth before I had to go on this journey. But then I think, yeah, but then I never would have written the book. So, this is what was meant to be. And I'm okay with that. But I just think of how shocking it is both for the parent and the adult child when they find it out. And isn't it better to share it? And also, if you're going to do a DNA test, let's say you're thinking about it. I mean, a lot of people during the holidays do this. It's like a gift they give. Let's see about our family, let's look
Right.
at our ancestral roots and whatever. Just be prepared that wherever it takes you, you're okay with it, that you'll find a way to deal with it. And there are resources.
That's a word. Just be prepared. Gail, thank
Yeah.
you so much. It's always, always great talking to you. The book is entitled What They Never Told Us, True Stories of Family Secrets and Hidden Identities Revealed. May the work of your hands continue to add a blessing to all those who read it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on the show again. You're great.
Indeed. Thanks, Gail. Stay on point, everybody. We're back right after this.